Today I'm going to take you through my 20 years of collecting Chaos Space Marines, and specifically the Alpha Legion, and share with you my brand new paint scheme. I think I've perfected the Alpha Legion, and I'm keen to see what you think too as I embark on my new army for 2024, the same army I've been collecting my whole life, just again. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. So how should I tell this story? Well, I'm going to start by doing something I've almost never done in 20 years of this hobby. I'm going to be repainting a model. The most recent model I made for my Alpha Legion on this channel was Omegon. I sculpted up Primarch of the Alpha Legion for use as a Chaos Space Marine. So to show off the new paint scheme I've come up with and to tell the entire journey of my Chaos Space Marine collecting, all the different ways I painted Alpha Legion, we're going to have the lovely B-roll of me repainting this Primarch. And while we are going to show the paints on scheme at the end of the video, I'm going to have a pretty concise breakdown of how to paint these if you would like to try it as well. Let's get into it. I've told the story of how I started painting a few times on the channel, but I'll briefly recap. When the Lord of the Rings Battle for Middle-earth magazine started coming around in the early thousands, I rapidly was brought in by the ads in the back of those issues that said, hey, 40k exists, space, robots, guns, lasers, everything I could possibly want. So I dived straight into Chaos Space Marines, and these are some of the first Marines I ever painted. When I first started out, I made my own custom chapter. And while they were very inspired by the Alpha Legion, as well as the Iron Warriors and Thousand Sons, my three faves as a kid, they were their own thing. I don't know what they were called, but I'm calling them the Blood Stump Marines. And they're mostly notable for their marking on their shoulder. When I was a kid, I thought it'd be really cool if they only earned their stripes as Chaos Space Marines when they first killed a Loyalist Space Marine, so they would chop their arm off and use the stump of their shoulder to paint their chapter symbol. I painted them dark blue with white trim, which is a pretty horrible paint scheme if I'm honest. And my painting leaves a lot to be desired. I was hampered by very limited resources. I had almost no money, so I only had about 10 paints, and I did what I could with them. This venerable Chaos Force would see me through most of my teenage years. With very little competition, the fact that I could paint in between the lines at all meant everyone complimented my armies. We were kids, we didn't know better. As painting these models progressed and I went from 12 to around 15, realizing that the white and blue was a bit jarring and didn't look particularly amazing, I started substituting gold in for a lot of the white, which invariably made my models look a lot like Night Lords. It was around here that I also left behind a lot of the concepts of the custom chapter and started thinking of these as very fancy looking Alpha Legion. Back then, the Alpha Legion were often depicted with this dark navy blue and either silver or gold trim. And I was trying to push the army I already had towards the gold trimmed Alpha Legion without invalidating it. And while today these models are not at all reminiscent of the Alpha Legion, harking back to the early thousands, you can see a vague similarity, I guess. They still look more like Night Lords though. But Night Lords or Alpha Legion, either way, they neither had lightning bolts nor did they have green scales. But at this point, all of that would become irrelevant because I was around 16. I was moving into my final years of high school and I discovered the same distractions that almost every hobby YouTuber talks about. So from the final years of high school through to the early years of university, Warhammer sat in the dust for me. So the next step on my hobby journey was when I re-entered it after university. I started share housing with an old high school friend and we encouraged each other to grab the new Dark Vengeance box. While I had occasionally dabbled in 5th edition and played some games, I hadn't really done much, but when Dark Vengeance came, it meant new Chaos Space Marine models, so of course I was hyped. And my mate was a Dark Angels player, so it was the perfect box for both of us. But this time I committed, fully committed, to painting the gold. There was no more white on these models, it was gold trim blue models. I hadn't really paid attention to the fact the Alpha Legion scheme had moved on, and when I did look at it, I didn't like it. So to make my guys not Night Lords, I added a whole lot of purple. I also added in green gems and accents. These two colors hopefully making them feel a little bit different from Night Lords. These models showed an improvement in age alone. I had more patience and a bit more technical skill than I did when I was a teenager, but I hadn't really practiced. So it was really just getting the colors where they needed to be. And with the luxury of a few more resources, we had White Dwarfs, we had early YouTube and Warhammer TV painting tutorials. Not that I watched them much. It just meant that I knew base coat, layer, highlight, and I had the patience to follow through with those steps. I'd always had a strong love for conversion, and in this era that continued, with me cutting off hands, magnetizing things, and also starting to get interesting with some of the basing. I'm particularly fond of the gruesome head gribblies inside the head on the Chaos Lord's base. As I advanced through this era, I began to get more and more involved with Warhammer, frequenting the Oakley Games workshops and starting to convert models even more. Anything old that I didn't like, such as my Chaos Obliterator that comes from around the end of that era. This was for a conversion competition at the local Games Workshop, and I proudly won it. There weren't that many entries, but it still made me proud. It was one of the first hobby-related things I'd ever won. And this was also the first time I'd ever seen anyone convert a Centurion into an Obliterator. And while we did see a bunch of them in the years to follow, while I have no proof of this, I know in my heart, this conversion came out before a single one was posted online. This was right after the box dropped. I saw them and thought, yes, Obliterators. But then one of the biggest changes to my hobby life that would ever happen occurred. And that was, I decided to open a game store. So I'd made the big move back home to the country town I grew up to start a hobby store. Why did I do this? Well, I haven't really talked about this on the channel, but funnily enough, it's because of Games Workshop. You see, my local Games Workshop store, or Warhammer as it would be known now, had a staff opening, and I applied for the job of store manager, and I didn't get it. So I did what every normal person does. I said, screw this, screw the city, I'm moving back to my hometown, and I'm opening my own damn hobby store. So I did. And in that environment, all those years ago, surrounded by local people that I was just meeting for the first time, making new friends and new gamers, I could finally focus on Warhammer in a more serious fashion. I started to work on these little guys. These were my Chaos Space Marines Redux. I decided that I was gonna start paying attention. I was gonna watch those Warhammer tutorials. I was gonna use shades and highlights, but still, something held me to my old paint scheme. Nothing could make me break away from that navy blue, and even though I made all these departures, purple, more gold, getting rid of the white, I was still ultimately retreading the same ground I tread when I was 12. Nostalgia can be a powerful tether, and that tether was keeping my Chaos army very similar. But it was in this early era of the store that my painting started to improve, and these very early models show my first attempts outside the box to make my models, well, Alpha Legion. I started to paint these little patches of metallic scales on the models to varying degrees of success. At this stage of my hobby journey, I had no artistic background and no artistic understanding. And I think a lot of the reasons these older color schemes don't work amazingly for me is because they were created without any grounding or understanding of color theory. But as I practiced more, developed, and surrounded myself with really cool people who are great in the hobby, like Murray, who has always been a better painter than me, these people inspired me to try new things, to change, and to, well, get better. At the same time though, in this hobby store community, this was the first time where people started, well, basically picking on me. Not in any serious way, in the hobby store banter kind of way. People would just be like, great Night Lords, Dave, I love your Night Lords. Because they knew it would annoy me, because I always said, no, damn it, they're Alpha Legion. But eventually, I kind of just accepted that they looked a lot more like Night Lords than Alpha Legion, and it was time for the big change, the one I'd been putting off for like 10 years. A lot had changed and years had passed, and I had gotten a lot better at painting. I decided it was finally time to make Alpha Legion. However, at the time, a lot of people were going for this airbrushed color shift paint for their Alpha Legion, and I found that heavy application of a single color shift left you very little room for variation. The Alpha Legion armies all looked quite good, but they all looked exactly the same. So I insisted on making a non-airbrushed, non-metallic version that would still feel Alpha Legion, and that's where I came up with this blue to green gradient tint tint with silver trim. I was also applying everything I loved. I'd been getting into Horus Heresy, so I was using Forge World parts. And at this stage, the Chaos sprue was so old that I started using Evil Craft bits for my Chaos Space Marines, coming up with some honestly pretty cool looking guys. I was fairly happy with this paint scheme and began repainting a handful of my models. But it was about this era that Chaos Space Marines really got abandoned. We hit 8th edition and, well, they fell behind. It became not a very enjoyable time to be a Chaos Space Marine player, and my attention drifted towards Age of Sigmar and Horus Heresy. People did stop mistaking my army for Night Lords, which was good, and overall I was really happy with this evolution, but it did have one major drawback, which is it took forever to paint. So much delicate line highlighting of trim, and some color choices I still wasn't quite happy with, meant that this paint scheme was painfully slow. And eventually, if I was going to return to Alpha Legion, I'd need to think up something different. All right, I have to talk about this model. I can't not. This, I think, is the pinnacle of what I'd achieved as a painter in the hobby era before YouTube. I loved this as a conversion, as a love letter to my childhood army. I created a Defiler, which is a model kit a lot of people think kind of a bit old and busted, but this guy I made because I loved the Defiler so much as a little kid. I wanted to pay homage to that and make the coolest Defiler I could imagine. So I used an Onaga Dooncrawler turret with Defiler bits, and I painted the best freehand I could at the time. I did the scenic base with a gibbed guy at the bottom and just made the coolest Defiler. It's also got the fetid bloat drone flail for the chain scourge. I just love it. And I think you should love it too. I don't think I've ever shown it off on the channel, but this represents kind of the start, I think, of me as a serious modeler, a serious wargamer. This was the point probably about 5 years ago where I just said, yeah, I want to do this. And I love it. I think it's cool. Enter Jazza. That's right, YouTube came along about 3 years ago and I started working on the channel. And with that, my progress as a hobbyist came along in leaps and bounds. It's amazing what doing hobby every day of the week will do for your skill. Practice, practice, practice meant I could try new things. I was playing with airbrushes for the first time and also non-metallic metal. I continued dabbling with my Chaos Space Marines for a while, repainting some old minis in videos on the channel, but mostly was focusing on Horus Heresy. And with great models available for Horus Heresy, I started playing around with some new paint schemes, as seen in the Chaos Raptors video. I effectively hybridized the previous scheme, but changed everything to non-metallic metal in my anti-metallic craze. The black lining and non-metallic metal really makes things pop, and I think is an improvement on the previous scheme. But again, it was painfully slow, as you can see on this Ravage Star Obliterator proxy. However, things really changed when I decided I wanted to get into playing armies, and Horus Heresy gave me that opportunity with the new box set. And I started airbrushing a lot more, doing purple undertones and teal over the top really heavily. This was basically the same scheme, but built to be really quick, as I could do vast armies with this airbrushing method and then paint all of the highlight areas. But Games Workshop would do me wrong again. After a life of being compared to Night Lords, they changed the color schemes. Alpha Legion became a lot more cobalt blue, but more importantly, the Sons of Horus went from a really nice forest green to this minty teal. And that only happened with the new Horus Heresy 2.0. Prior to that, the Sons of Horus were a lot more drab and military looking, but now they were these really bright models that looked a lot like the way I was painting my alphas. So now I started getting jibes about my Sons of Horus, and adding to that, I wasn't actually all that happy with how this scheme looked on infantry. It was a bit too overbearing, and while the gradient worked really well on vehicles, it didn't land so well on infantry. So once again, my zest for chaos fell away, and it was Trader Guard time. So I wanted to take the opportunity to introduce you all to what years of Warhammer homebrewing looks like. Surviving closely intertwined for 10,000 years, my Alpha Legion and their Dark Mechanicus allies have formed bonds deeper than most. So my 40k Alpha Legion are named Task Force Katos, also named after a Greek mythological sea creature. Task Force Katos are extremely well resourced, known for bringing relic war gear to the battlefield where nobody seems to know where they got it from. And that's due to the templates and STZs that the Darkforge Charybdis has managed to maintain, giving them access to relics most Chaos Space Marines don't have. And I can showcase this in my 40k army by including some Horus Heresy Legends units such as Duradio Dreadnoughts and Sakaran tanks, but also by using the Horus Heresy patterns of vehicles such as Demeus Predators for my standard Chaos vehicles, as well as Land Raider Proteus chassis for my 40k Land Raiders. For the infantry, well, they often need to become the image of what people expect, the image of fear, Baroque heraldry, trophy racks, and all the trimmings of the dark Chaos forces. But sometimes they don't, and they just go to battle in simple, clean power armor, pretending to be Imperial warriors. The order of the day is up to the Alpha Legion. My Alpha Legion feel for their lost brothers, not only those of the Alpha Legion, but the other Chaos Space Marine legions. And they believe that only when the Imperium falls will Chaos be weakened enough to free their brothers from its grip. This naive assumption plays into the dark hopelessness of 40k. They're striving for the destruction of humanity to save someone who cannot be saved. If you'd like to find out more about Task Force Katos, I've written a full article on them over on the Tabletop Time Lore Library. The Tabletop Time Lore Library is an expanding resource where you can find out all about the factions we homebrew and play. And this website is only possible thanks to our sponsor, Squarespace. If you've ever wanted to make your own website, Squarespace is the website for you. I didn't know anything about making a website, but Squarespace made it super easy with their custom templates. These are a fantastic, quick and easy way to get the structure and vibe of the website that you're after. And once you've started with a template, you can use Squarespace's next-gen website fluid engine to customize every design and detail even further. Using drag and drop boxes to simply lay out your website for mobile or for PC, this feature is built in and included on every Squarespace website. But perhaps you're ready to take your website to the next level and make it a business. Squarespace has full functionality as an online store, with all the tools you need to sell physical, digital, or service products in one place. And if you've got a physical location, you can also pair that with a Square Reader, using Squarespace's amazing POS systems to track all your inventory and keep it in one place. So if you're ready to share your dream with the world, go to squarespace.com/tabletoptime and get 10% off your first order of a website or domain. The links for that are down in the description. So thank you, Squarespace. It's been a joy being able to share my little bits of homebrew with everyone, and I hope you've been enjoying them. So if you check out the articles on the Lore Library, which we're adding to each time we do one of these videos, we'd love to hear what you think. Give us your interpretation of our little fan factions. But I think I'm getting pretty close to wrapping up this model, so let's see where we're at. Heavy charcoal. So now you know the Alpha Legion I'm creating. Basically my first ever full restart of my long-term favorite army, Chaos Space Marines. But rather than restarting with new models, I wanted to use Omegon, the model I recently sculpted as a Chaos Space Marine Terminator Lord. I thought it would be fitting to bridge my armies, old and new, and bring this new army together with a suitable character model. The Chaos Lord in Terminator kit is pretty old by the standards of the rest of the range, so I think this will make a fantastic model to lead my armies. Now, I don't repaint models, and I wanted to tell you why. Personally, I've always felt that it's great to have a chronology of your painting progress. It's always good, at least for me, to constantly look forward, to strive towards the future while being able to reflect on your past, to learn from your previous work, but also to admire it and to respect the journey that brought you to where you are today. Most people I've ever heard talk about getting rid of their old armies and models that are hobbyists and painters rather than war gamers first and foremost generally speak of it with regret. Jazza is a great example. Having had to sell his Blood Angels army early in his career, he's always expressed remorse that he had to make that sacrifice. So for me, I'd rather get a new model and paint it, or keep moving forward or sideways or whatever, than repaint an old one. It feels like erasing part of my history, and I don't really like doing that. But today I'm making an exception. And the reason is, well, simple. It's twofold. One is I think this Omegon model is genuinely one of the coolest conversions I've ever made, and it would be a shame to relegate it to the shelf for an army that it never really got to lead. And two is I thought it served as a perfect vehicle to tell this story through. It really does mark a point of evolution where I started coming back and caring about my Chaos Space Marines again, refinding my passion and utilizing every single thing I've learned up to now to create an army paint scheme that is not only something I'm finally happy with, but also something that isn't too laborious to paint. It is quite nice, but I can also see myself painting armies to this standard. So you followed along with my journey and every step along the road that has taken my Alpha Legion from their strange roots as the blood stump Marines in my early childhood to the Alpha Legion today. But before I show you the finished result and before we go, I thought some people out there might be interested in, well, knowing how I painted it. You've seen it along this video, but I'm gonna do my paint scheme in a rapid fire way. We're gonna show everything on screen again briefly, and I'm gonna take you through all the steps, and I'm gonna try and do it in 1 minute. So let's do it. So you've sprayed your models black. That's sensible. I hand painted over an old paint job. Base coat with Nagaroth Knight with a Zenithal of Phoenician Purple. Dry brush 50/50, a mix of scale 75 black metal and cobalt metal. Dry brush highlight pure cobalt metal. Edge and point highlight with Emerald Alchemy. Base coat the trim with black metal, a controlled shade of Seraphim Sepia, then Agras Earthshade to create contrast, mirroring non-metallic metal. Highlight this with Thrash Metal. Edge highlight with Stormhost Silver. Base coat the extreme decorations with black gold. Wash with Qualia Green Shade. Highlight with Peridot Alchemy towards the sky. Point highlight Stormhost Silver or Thrash Metal. The mechanical brassy areas base coat Warplock Bronze. Highlight with Scale 75 Decayed Metal. Zenithal Edge highlight with Liberator Gold. Wash with Agrax Earthshade to bring it all together. Base coat decorative leather like this cloak Vallejo Heavy Charcoal. Highlight and blend together Incubi Darkness through to Vallejo Scurvy and Jade Green. Finish with a point highlight of Foul Green. Black leathers and poles any matte black of your choice. Highlight them Skaven Blight Dinge and then Storm Vermin Fur point highlight. The mechanical silvers base coat with Iron Warriors. Wash with Old Nun Oil specifically, then highlight roughly with Lead Belcher. The purple weapon casings you base coat Nagaroth Knight, then blend and highlight through Phoenician Purple, edge highlight with Cacophony Purple. Handles and wraps base coat Barak Nar Burgundy, highlight with Vallejo Tan, and then highlight with Elf Flesh. Bring back the red with a watered down wash of Carroburg Crimson. Lenses base coat any mid red, then highlight with Evil Sun Scarlet, then Troll Slayer Orange, Fire Dragon Bright, and a dot of Vallejo Pale Yellow to finish. Blackline the whole model carefully between metals with Black Legion contrast paint. Finally, leather pouches are painted with Mornfang Brown, highlighted with XV88, and then a scratchy point highlight with Vallejo Khaki. That's the bulk of the scheme for almost all of the warriors of the Alpha Legion. Now watch that 10 times to actually remember what I said. If you like the work that we do and you'd like to enable us to continue doing this for a job, the best way to support us is through our Patreon. Every week I'm putting up a little behind the scenes video. You can ask questions and get some inside info, and that's a great avenue to have some input on the content that we create. We also have our monthly mini review, which is a treat to do every month. We haven't read out the names of our new patrons in a little while, but now is the time. So I'd like to thank Sarah Oko, Shadowhawk 19, Wissaran, Adam Duchin, Son Fahig, Robert Dunn, Nathaniel Peacock, Rockelman, Servant, Energy Hunter, Simon Thomas, Hosa Kyle, Mark Mouvet or Movet, Cody Gallagher, Michaela Coombs, Princeps Ian, Titan Commander himself, and Jonathan Henderson. Thank you so much for your support. It really does mean a lot and helps us sleep at night knowing we can come to work tomorrow. Hope to see you all in the mini review. I'm so happy with how my Omegon or Alfarius or Chaos Terminator Lord turned out. And I think this new paint scheme is going to be really awesome. It's not only unique, but it pays homage to Legion, which was the intent, and that original Indigo paint scheme of the Alpha Legion. It's gonna be really fun to paint up a whole army of these guys. And if you wanna find out more about their lore, go check out the Tabletop Time lore library. Thank you Squarespace for sponsoring the video and making that possible, where I've chucked in my sort of fan homebrew stuff of how it's all coming along. And I'm gonna keep developing that into the future. Thank you very much for watching. If you want to see more of this, more personal projects, more of our passion and the wargaming that we do at home on the channel, let us know in the comments and keep watching the videos. Bye everyone.